Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. And as you may have seen, I am covering the Chauvin trial, but I'm not going into massive detail like I do my others. It's just a quick overview of the day. It's a very high intensity emotional trial, and it's forecast to last as long as 4 weeks, so I think it'd just be way too much, so I thought this would just be a better idea. We are now on day 3, and as you remember from yesterday, it didn't end on a very good note with the last witness. She was told to come back this morning. So that's the first witness. It doesn't last very long because the defence only has one question, and that is if she showed her firefighter ID. No, she didn't, and that's the end of that. So the next witness is another bystander, but he actually worked in Cup Foods and had interaction with George, and he at first noticed the size of George. I mean, we all know he's a big guy, so this brought him to ask the question, if he played football. I just interacted with him. It wasn't anything massive, but when he noticed when George gave him an answer, it took him a while to answer back, and he did get the impression that he was high. So the guy that's on the stand now was who George gave the fake $20 bill to. And then after George had gone outside, the witness went to talk to his manager, and his manager wanted him to go get George and bring him back inside. He went with another person to try and get him to come in, and he wouldn't. So then 3 of them went back out, and they tried to get him to come back out, but come back into the store, but he wouldn't. So the manager decided to call the police, and this is where the chain of events began. To avoid any of this, even the witness offered to pay himself, but the manager didn't want him to. I don't know if he'd had bother with this before, so he went ahead and called the police. So when things started to get a bit crazy outside, that's when the witness went back outside to see what was going on, and he did record it, but on that night he decided to delete it because he thought George was dead, and he just didn't want that on his phone. And his decision about George being dead was based on the route that the ambulance took. He said they didn't take the quickest route to the hospital. They went a different way, which made him think that he wasn't alive. And as like all the others, he feels guilt and says that if he'd just taken the bill, it could have all been avoided. Now, you've heard from other witnesses, they all feel so much guilt, and my heart just breaks for all of them. And after everything that happened, he just didn't feel safe at Cup Foods anymore. So, it's impacted so many people, mentally and emotionally. It's just horrible. So we move on to the next witness, who was sat in his car when he saw the police walk up to George's car, and he started to film from his car. There wasn't much more to this questioning. I mean, it was just another recording to add to the recordings that have already been given. The next witness is an older gentleman, and he saw what happened more or less from the beginning. This guy's just such a sweet guy. And he saw from when the officers were trying to get George into the patrol car, and he tried to help George by saying, look, you can't win, just get in the car. And this he was on his own at this point. Nobody else had come to start to look to see what was going on. George just did not want to get in at all. he was saying he was claustrophobic, and even then he's saying he couldn't breathe. I mean, you could tell he was absolutely petrified. And at this point, the witness just starts to cry, and I just wanted to give him a hug. Me and my best friend were watching this together, and we both said the same. It was just heartbreaking. So they show some more footage, and I haven't personally seen, I don't know if any of you guys have, but I haven't seen how he managed to be at the other side of the squad car on the floor. So we get to see that perspective and what went on with that. And, you know, as it progresses, this witness is telling the officers to let him breathe. So it wasn't just the crowd that we saw. This guy was telling them on his own until others came. He said that when he saw the paramedics arrive, he knew it was over for George, meaning that he was dead. So the defence make the decision not to cross-examine this witness, which I believe is a good decision. It was the best decision. So now we go on to body cam footage, starting from when the police arrived to go speak to George in the car he was in. And honestly, the way the officer spoke to George was so out of order. This was over a fake $20 bill. So the police went in aggressive straight away. George was clearly petrified. He didn't know what was going on, what he'd done to basically deserve this aggressiveness. So then we go and see them trying to, from this officer's body cam, of them trying to get in the car. George just does not want to get in the back of that car. I think, you know, he was saying he's claustrophobic. It was tight and small in the back of that car. He kept saying he wanted to. He said, basically, count to 3 and I'll get in. He just did not want to get in, clearly. So when he was laid on his stomach at the side of the car, you hear an officer say, should they move him on his side? But obviously they didn't, and they all knew he'd passed out, but not one of them moved. And seeing the footage from this angle is even more hard-hitting. And one of them actually had their hands on his wrist. And from this footage, you don't actually see him doing anything. He's just holding on to his wrist. So at that point, I was like, well, why didn't you just check his pulse then? And they're still being really, really aggressive. And honestly, you'd think he'd murdered someone or just gone into that store and just gone in with a gun shooting everybody. I mean, you just totally forget this is all over a $20 bill. You'd think he'd seriously done something very, very, very wrong. Then at one point, some more footage, and you do actually see an officer take his pulse, and I'm sure, and I got my husband to listen to it, and he says that's what the officer says, and it's when he's checking his pulse, he says, I can't find one. None of them moved. He didn't speak up. He didn't say anything. He just said it to the officer next to him. He didn't tell Chauvin, look, mate, I can't feel a pulse. We're going to have to get off him. And, you know, you can hear over the radio that it's now a code 3. So this show keeps showing officers' body cam, and it doesn't get better. It does not get any better. Every single one of them is bad. And my best friend pointed out to me, I totally missed this, that Chauvin's body cam was found on the floor. It can be seen in the footage on the floor next to the squad car, but with no reason as to why yet. And then Officer Tao. He turns to the crowd and actually says to the crowd, This is what happens when you do drugs, kids. What? Why? So, I was on Twitter last night and let me get my phone. And I found an article about the guy that was in the car with George. And it says that it is called Morris Hall or Morris. And he's filed notice to invoke his Fifth Amendment right. So there we go. So another emotionally charged day. It's just horrible, and how I just don't know how the defence is going to explain this away and make this in any way George's fault, or the fact that George had something wrong with him, that he was high on drugs, because no, they could have calmed down that situation, give him time, calmed him down, instead of trying to ram this big guy into the back of the car that clearly didn't want to. He wasn't resisting arrest. He had no weapons. So just let the guy calm down. It was a fake $20 bill. He hadn't killed anyone. He'd tried to use a fake $20 bill. Whether he'd known it was fake or not, there was still no need for the officers to behave the way they did. I'm just disgusted, absolutely disgusted. So we will see what tomorrow brings. So until then, bye for now.